All right, so in week 3 of JavaScript 3, we will be learning about classes. Now, you may not have realized it, but for this whole module, all of JavaScript 3, we've actually been using classes the whole time. Well, we've been using one class specifically, and that class is the promise class. So if we were to create a promise here, what would we do? Well, we'd write new promise, and then we'd write our two functions here. So we'd have resolve and reject, right? Now, the promise itself isn't important here, and classes have nothing to do with promises. But what is important is this new keyword, which indicates that we're instantiating a class. Now, what's a class? So if we look at the documents here, we look at MDN documents, a class is a template for creating objects. They encapsulate data with code to work on that data. So that's more or less a fancy way of saying it's a new way for us to organize ourselves and a new way for us to encapsulate functionality and data into one place. So if I were to simplify this even further, you can think of a class as a template filled with functions and objects and variables that we can create. It's like a factory that we can create over and over again. So once we define a class, we've more or less defined a factory to create objects filled with this functionality, and it's encapsulated so that nothing outside can access the data, easily access or modify the data unless we define a function to access that. Now, let's stop looking at code for a second. If we were to go to YouTube, for example, let's say we were rebuilding YouTube and we wanted to build a YouTube clone. Let's click on any random video. Let's look at this coding tutorial video. Arrays of objects. So we don't care about the video itself. What we do care about is, let's look at a comment here. So if we were building a YouTube app and we needed to build comments into our website, what does a comment contain? Well, a comment contains a username, contains the comment itself, so some sort of content, contains a timestamp. So all of these elements are present on every single comment. And the functionality to create a comment or like a comment or reply to a comment is probably going to be the same for every comment. So by defining a class and encapsulating that functionality into one little box where we can constantly create new comments, it makes it easy for us to share, reuse, and create flexible code. Classes are something that aren't super common in JavaScript, to be honest with you. Personally, I don't use classes a lot in my daily work when I'm working with JavaScript. However, they are incredibly common in other languages, like Java, C#. If you're familiar with the concept of object-oriented programming, which I certainly don't expect you to be, this is where classes are key. So although you may not end up using classes as you continue in your web development career, you're certainly going to come across them when you start working with React, which is a front-end framework that you'll have in a few modules in the future. And if you decide to explore other languages like the ones I mentioned before, then you will without a doubt be dealing with classes. And what I mean is you're likely not going to be writing a lot of classes. However, as we've already seen with promise, or maybe we're creating a date, so const date equals new date, you'll certainly be consuming a lot of classes and you'll be using them, especially in the next module when you're dealing with Node and more backend stuff. You'll definitely be using classes in that regard and consuming them. So if you don't fully understand everything, after this, that's 100% okay. Classes are a bit weird. They're fancy objects, like I said, but as long as you understand to an extent, the goal of a class and why we're using them in the first place, then that's what's most important.